A lot of people, you traveling right at the right time because it's the middle of school vacation week, so everybody's either already there or they'll come in,
Well,
you're right in the middle.
Yeah, hopefully that's good then, yeah. Hey.
Ariel?
Be expecting a lot of people remotely today?
I thought maybe one or two, I just want to make sure.
Heather, Keith, and Ben, I know.
Do you think it'll be, yeah?
I think Heather on a text thread said she.
Oh, Madeline's there, great. Hello, folks, we're just making sure that our panelists that are remote are connected. Bear with us just a minute. Just to do a sound check, Madeline, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Were you able to hear me?
Can you all hear us now, perhaps?
I can hear you guys.
Okay, great. But you didn't hear us until just now, right?
No, I
Right.
heard you. I heard you earlier.
Oh, okay.
I was.
Okay, all right, we just wanted to make sure that you folks could hear us, so apologies. We were trying through the owl and for some reason it wasn't working. So right now we're going through my laptop. Hopefully that'll work fine. So we're in a small room, so it shouldn't be a problem.
You check the attendees, you've got more panelists, I think, to add.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Yeah, sorry. We have a few others that have come in, so thank you for joining remotely. Okay. Thank you. I think we have everybody we're going to be getting probably at this point. So sorry. So maybe we should just clarify just for folks who we have in the room here. So Andy Port, we have Rick Alden, Councilor McCauley, Andrew Levine, Jennifer Blanchet, Councilor Khan. Remotely, we have Councilor Granis, Councilor Shand, Beth Track, and Madeline Nash from the Housing Trust. So pretty good composition. Thank you all for attending either in person or on Zoom. Today, we're circling back, as you know, about the MBTA communities and how we plan on meeting our requirements under that program. So I'm just going to show on the screen briefly our reminder slide. But we've been focused out of the criteria that we have primarily on this unit count. And so where we know our 40R district provides a significant number, we've been mainly focused on meeting the differential or the gap there from the 40R. So that's picking up from back in sort of our discussion in February. So we, since that time, have looked at various, things. We've looked at criteria, and there might be others that folks have, but criteria to use for the purposes of selecting the area or areas. And then we have, in consideration of the 3 areas that we have in the city that would be essentially eligible with the state here, we have the downtown, we have Story Avenue and Low Street, which has been sort of taken off the table, and the 40R district. So working around the 40R district, we've primarily been looking at 2 primary types of areas. This is a quick summary sheet of that I sent around, and it's posted on the website as well under the MBTA Communities Project page. This PDF document is just a snapshot, but it basically has a table, which I'll show in just a second. And it's the primary purpose of our discussion is to look at this table and the maps and to try to reach some consensus on what we think makes sense. The planning board did discuss this last night, and we'll get to that in just a moment. They did have a thought of what would make sense here. But in summary, the unit capacity options are shown as a tab at the top is linking to this main spreadsheet table. You can click on the left side here by letter or on this these columns here just to see the options. So if you were to look at A on this table and see that map option, it shows you which parcels in purple are part of that sub area that would be added to the 40R district, which is shown as this red boundary on each of these maps. So with that table being the summary at the top there, I'm just going to blow up that real quick, a couple of things just to show one example through this. So we have our working sheet, the same format that we've seen before. The total number of units required. We have our existing 40R. As a reminder, we're using the conservative low end based on putting aside for a minute all the details that the state uses to calculate build out. We're using the lower end just to be conservative. We talked before about having a little bit of a buffer because of that. We are having a discussion with the state EOHLC next week to talk with them about a few particulars so we can hone in on that more specifically because there are some idiosyncrasies or little details that the state guidelines don't account for in local regulations. So we have to clarify how that would get calculated. And I can go into that further if you want, but in essence, we're using the conservative end of 862, even though we think we're going to fall more closer to the 930. But that leaves us about 430 that we need to make up. I put in parentheses here that given prior discussion, if we use the Hines Way area, essentially taking credit for an area that has been already built out, that would reduce that remaining capacity, unit capacity that we need to create to 355. So we're down to about 355 units total that we need to make up. And then the working sheet that we've been using, in essence, just for use one column, is in this example, Parker Street to Graff Road with 40 Parker Street included. So that's the Mark Ritchie Wood turbine facility or site. With that property included in this example, which was that map I showed a second ago. In this scenario, first purple section here shows we didn't model 20 units an acre. We weren't assuming that scenario, so that wasn't run through the modeling. We did look at the possibility of either 30 units an acre or 40 in that scenario for those parcels in that configuration specifically. And that yielded, again, we're using the conservative low end, so 905 to 981 based on the two numbers that the state uses. And then we have to clarify in the middle where they're going to land on this between those two. But in essence, we're using the conservative 905. The 40 units an acre has a slightly higher number, obviously 1208, that this sub-district itself creates as in terms of units under this MBTA program. The next row is showing additive, so it's adding that number from the top here that we need that we have from the existing 40R. It's adding it to that, and then it's saying, here's the total that we would have. And so the result is shown in the yellow down here, which is once we've got that number with the 40R district and this map option combined, have we exceeded the 1292? And this negative number here is indicating that we've exceeded the state requirement. This 72 is closer to that, right? So we're looking to get to zero or, or that negative number to make sure we've reached the state requirement. So each of these scenarios in the table basically shows based on those sketch maps of each of the areas, shows those numbers. And the other thing that I've indicated in here, just to illustrate our options and some of the things that have been discussed, in the red boxes that I've highlighted. So there's a whole section of Parker Street options. Before this bar right here, all these ones on the left are Parker Street options. So Parker Street, there were various different variations on a theme, and basically add a parcel here, delete a parcel there, go this far down Parker Street or don't. And so each of these is a variation on that Parker Street section. The one exception is this Hines Way. So in this whole row here before the bar, this is all expanding the 40R district, and all of them in here except for H, the Hines Way, is adding along the Parker Street side going towards the business park. Hines Way is on the other side, so we've got that separately here. I think at this point, unless somebody objects, I think the working assumption is here as we work with the state to correct the data set that's being used, and we take the credit for essentially the 75 that's in here. So we've made a note of that sort of appear with this 355 I mentioned. So beyond that, on the right side, you're seeing two options that we've also talked about. So originally we talked about MPRO or reaching up towards MPRO on Route 1. As a corridor, possibly including the hillside site and possibly the cemetery. We talked about that, the pros and cons of various configurations in order to attach it to the 40R or have it be contiguous. And we were sort of steering away from that into a separate district. So these two, I and J, are not the original MPRO sort of extension of a 40R, but a separate district that is configured in two different ways. So in this table here, and I have the maps for displaying each of these options we can go through. The highlighted box here, the red ones are just examples where based on the negative numbers that you're seeing at the bottom here. So this is the result at the end of the day with the 40R and with that map scenario to add to the 40R, or in here to have a new district added to the 40R as a separate district with the 40R. In those scenarios, the red boxes are basically indications of if we did just that option and the existing 40R, we would be, and so this is at 30 units an acre or 40 units an acre. At these red boxes, we would immediately essentially satisfy the state requirement with that. In the blue boxes here, this is actually the one that I'll let Rick speak to this as well as the chair of the planning board. That this is the blue boxes to combined, all three of these together with the 40R district represents what the planning board recommended last night, coming out of their discussion. So they were recommending 3 properties on Parker Street, which are essentially the ones, and I can pull up these maps as needed, across from the Mark Ritchie wood facility that is 187 units. Then there was an added to that, the assumption again of Hines Way, and then added to that the NPRO version 2, as we're calling it, which includes a section of Low Street crossing under the rail trail there. So, and that all these units together, the 188, 75, 187, and then the 862 up top, reaches the threshold. The other one that I highlighted just for reference is the 2 green ones here. Those taking a jog on Parker Street, and that's another map I can show on that, with the Hines Way plus that existing 40R would do that. So there's different ways to do this, but in essence, there are primary options here, and then there are variations on that theme. There's Parker Street in some variation, and then there's the MPRO area in some, configuration. Unless somebody wants to revisit our addition of Hines Way in there, we're really down to these 2 areas and some variation on it. So with that, I think I would open it up to the committee discussion, and I'm sorry, Rick, did you want to add anything to the planning board?
Do you want to just show that map?
Sure, yeah, sorry, yep, so, sorry, let me, one second, I must have, so- I had that up, sorry. Yep.
So this is what we discussed at the planning board last night is what our preferred scenario would be for moving forward. So there was a lot of concern, looking at that previous table, there are many ways that you could get over the 1,292 threshold simply using parcels on Parker Street, but there was concern about intruding too far into the business park. And there seemed to be some consensus about adding these 3 parcels on that are adjacent to Boston Way. One of them is directly across the street from 1 Boston Way, and then the other 2 beside it. So those seem to be an appropriate extension that matched what is already there, facing on Boston Way, facing on the corner of Boston Way and Parker Street, with a modest addition into the business park. Then we looked at the NPRO, what's listed there as NPRO/low, and that gives us, if we're looking at the low estimate, that gives us 188 units. The Parker Street piece would give us another 187 units, and that gets us almost all the way there with just those 2 pieces. And that NPRO low piece is the northern part is the NPRO site right on Kerry. Then you've got a couple of business zone parcels on Route 1. Then going to the left, 2 residential zone parcels adjacent to the Graf Rink, and then across the street, 2 industrially zoned parcels facing on Low Street. And even though that lot extends across the dotted red line is the half-mile radius from train station. Even though that larger parcel extends across there, most of that area back there is wet. So it's not likely to be developed there. So it's really, the idea is development on Low Street. And the reason we felt that this was a good site was, A, it's walkable to the train station. B, it's very walkable to CVS in the downtown. D, it's close to schools and recreation facilities. And in general, we felt that a residential use of the Enpro site is a better use than say, a fast food restaurant or whatever could be done in the B3 district right now. So if we could promote a higher quality of development there, that would be, we thought, desirable. So those two pieces, Parker Street and Enpro Low, get us almost all the way there, but we still need a little bit more to get over the finish line. So adding Heinz Way in gives us potentially another 75 units of capacity, even though probably nothing will happen there. It's probably just theoretic capacity, but nothing will happen there. But that would get us to achieve the goal of getting a total of 1,292 units in the most conservative assumptions about unit capacity.
And using the 30 unit.
And use, yes,
parameter, so
right,
it's not,
so that-
not as dense as
Right.
that grades down as it goes away.
Right, so Heinz Way, right, the State Street portion of the existing district is currently zoned for 30 units per acre. So adding Heinz Way to it makes sense there, not changing the density. The Boston Way side is zoned for 40, but we felt that potentially that'd be too much for having a higher density going down Parker Street. So we felt that that would be, again, another so-called smart growth B district with the 30 units per acre. And then the same thing with Enpro. We didn't feel like we needed to go to the train station level of density there, that the 30 units per acre would make more sense there. So this is what we would recommend, that we didn't actually vote on it, but there was a consensus of those members present that this would be our desired approach. And I guess we were asking, if this were to go forward, we would then need to ask MVPC to complete its economic feasibility analysis for affordable housing on the Enpro site.
Thank you, Rick, for adding to that. I did, just to be clear, I did send to the council a memo just summarizing briefly that, and I didn't elaborate on in great detail. I can further elaborate on it, but my view was, and I completely understand the perspective of the planning board. My recommendation or my thought was that I landed on the scale of various different balances of factors here. I landed more on the Parker Street side as opposed to using this Enpro area, so to speak. There are a couple of reasons for that. I just wanted to note that for the record. I think that it's more important that the discussion happens here and that the council obviously reaches consensus as a body. But we're here, planning board and advisory committee to help with that process. My reasons for that are several, but I just wanted to just be clear, sort of where I stand. I have no problem whatsoever with rezoning this area in that capacity. I think it makes sense conceptually. I don't have an issue with it. I don't know that we've really discussed this particular area before, so to speak. So while this is an area that the council's discussed before in terms of housing, isn't necessarily new. It's an expansion of it. I don't necessarily know, how that discussion goes and anything else that might be involved there. The Enpro site, we might think of the MBTA communities as a way of harnessing the redevelopment of that site, harnessing MBTA to get the redevelopment of the site and to focus on multifamily there. That's something that we can also easily toggle on and off, and which I agree with, toggling the multifamily and removing the sort of commercial component or option, which to me does not make as much sense there to have a traffic generating use in that location, given the way Cary Ave and Route 1 are oriented southbound. To me, the multifamily housing makes sense there. It's just not obvious to me that we would need MBTA communities in order to do that. One other factor I was looking at was just any area that's closer to High Street, closer to these sort of areas of the city, the historic areas of the city, tend to be a little bit more sensitive and bring up other discussions and debates that might be had about the zoning parameters. So I think coming about our discussion last night, we were working on the assumption that if the scenario is being used, we're working with the 30 units an acre and basically the same sort of parameters out of the 40R district and tweaking only as necessary based on our discussion and based on if there's anything, of course, with the MBTA communities that would be precluded. But one of the things that we lose out on if we do here versus say Parker Street, just by example, which I also feel like is worth noting, just the size of the business park, a few more parcels, it doesn't, in my view, substantially impact that area, so to speak. But that being said, the EFA that Rick mentioned is actually, I think, it's somewhat important because it illustrates here that not only is there more of a debate to be had with the state about what we can do there on affordable housing, but we're immediately limited to somewhere between 10 and 20% on affordable housing. And my understanding is most communities are not right now landing somewhere, but they're landing somewhere between 10 and 15%, but not necessarily getting to 20 and certainly not getting to 25 because that's not allowed under MBTA. So all these things, being said, it's not, I guess, immediately obvious to me that this is a preferable option to do this in a little bit more of a complex way and add in this other area. Mainly because if the goal here is to really focus on MPRO, and I'm not sure what we think is going to happen sort of specific from a practical reality in this area here, given what's there, and the configuration of the lots and wetlands and so forth. To me, it seems like this could be more easily accomplished in that way, and we wouldn't necessarily have to reduce the affordable percentage that we're creating of units, and maintain a little bit more discretion in this area here for what happens. Overall, there's a valid validity to each option and area, and each of these factors, is different. It comes in different ways. That's just wanted to be clear that that's where I fell. At the end of the day, I'm fine with whatever option we end up choosing here. We just have to be cognizant that this has a little bit more involved with it, including the discussion if there's any other parameters that folks want to adjust in local zoning in order to accomplish that. Whereas this one is a little bit more straightforward in that respect. So,
And if I'm following you right, you're basically saying we need to think about where we want to have the customizability that we get from doing our zoning rather than the MBTA communities related zoning, and that we should think about a site like MPRO, maybe that's not where we want to do.
well, that's one primary factor for me in thinking that MPRO is a little bit different because of where it's situated. To me, that seems like something we'd want to have a little bit more of discretionary review, where MBTA does not allow that. It's an as of right, so to speak. There is some design control, but to be clear, under MBTA communities, the state can also essentially evaluate the type of standards you have to make sure they're not going to essentially be effectively precluding. It's a little right. You're not going to have as sturdy a process in pushing back if you get something that's unacceptable. So again, that's just one factor. But to me, that seems like it would be perhaps more important up here than down here, and that's added to that to me on the.
And others might disagree and think that Parker Street 3 you really want to have more control rather than an MPRO site.
Yeah,
and that's the discussion that.
Right. That's a discussion we all need to have. So
just a question.
Sure.
Are you suggesting then to include, instead of option D, include option E?
Sorry, let me just go back to the table. I apologize. I don't remember which one is which. So sorry. Yeah, no, I haven't. So it's okay. So sorry. Say again.
You suggest, so I understand what the planning board has suggested.
Yes.
And are you suggesting swapping out D and J for E? Is that what you are?
I guess what I would say is I'm not wedded to any particular. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Maybe you should.
Well, I think it's actually important because and I don't think my answers here is unreasonable, but I'm not wedded to any particular scenario on Parker Street because again, you can see here with the red boxes, there are several options on Parker Street to meet the requirements. I'm not so fixed in thinking that, these certain lots on Parker Street have to be that. I can walk through each one why I think makes sense. But to me, Parker Street, any one of these options that fulfills that on primary with the Hines Way, for instance, to me would be acceptable and would make sense. So I don't have to pick, I guess, one of these Parker Street specifically. I can sort of tell you which one I prefer. But to me, any one of those could work just as well, I think, generically is the way I'm looking at it.
Okay, so, well, I'll jump to the end there. Okay.
Sure.
Because I think, we're an advisory group, right? And so we can very easily say the planning board recommends what we have, plus D, H, and J.
Yep.
Right? Accordingly, and here are the advantages for that. I didn't get a chance to read your memo, it just kind of came in.
Yeah.
Right? And the other option that we have is what we have at 9:30 plus only option E. That gets us to our number.
Gotcha.
And the advantage of that, and really the advantage is that J has 10% affordable housing, and E has 25% housing. And then let the public and the council decide which option they want.
Agreed.
And
Agreed.
okay,
Yep.
that's why I'm
Yep.
trying to.
Agreed.
If you have a choice, pick.
Very much agreed with that. Yep.
I think, because I've had Andy and I have had the conversation outside of this, sitting in the office, and while he's perhaps okay. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Looking at these drawings, developing these, we've talked about them. Well, as a planner, he said he's okay with any of those. I think there's also the sensitivity to the position that some members of the council and some members of the planning board have said about not going too far down Parker Street, and therefore,
Yeah.
I think your assumption there that the jog is the sort of most palatable, given the others' concerns,
Yeah.
and that would be the one that
Yeah, yeah.
is the first step. If I were to add to that, while we have seen some zoning in more sensitive areas face more challenges when it got to full council, I would personally think it would be good to have discussed in this group which of these other options we're most comfortable with that would also get us to the number, sort of a contingency plan.
Agreed, yeah.
Agreed. Not that I have I actually personally have zero issue with the Empro site being developed, and I think it's logical that it be residential, but having witnessed this process on multiple occasions and knowing we do have a deadline, I think it's worth discussing. Just if we can't do that, if we can't get the consensus on that, where else could we get it?
Thank you. And I just want to know that, Beth, I don't, Councilor Khan,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Beth, did you, yeah,
Yeah, thanks. Before we go any further, can we just review on the map what E and F are? I'm pretty clear about all the rest of them, but I like the description of a jog is not necessarily totally clear. If we could just like make sure we know exactly what each of those table things are talking about. Thanks. Okay.
yeah, apologies. So, and I'm happy to flip through these maps, we go corresponding with the table. I can, it might be a little hard to show both at the same time, but anyway, this is the jog scenario. And I'm sorry, which, are there other ones that folks wanted to see? Because there's several on this variation here on a theme, but
E and F are
Yeah.
both jogs, but one of them doesn't
Shorter
go
one.
all the way to, one of them ends sooner, the shorter jog.
so I zoomed out a little bit on this one, so it's not the same scale, but you can see it's just,
Now that's
that's E, which goes all the way. This one just omits that corner.
Okay. Thank you.
Let me know if you want me to pull up, if anybody here wants me to pull up another one, I can just flip to it, so.
May I?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
sure,
hi.
yeah.
So, I do want to just go back a little bit to our criteria. And one of the things that's helpful is to look at how each of what we've kind of landed on meets the criteria. And I know one could say that we never really talked about a rubric and how we decide, but I'll go to a couple of things that resonate with me. And it's very helpful to see where the planning board landed, but there's a couple of things. One is, how could we get to this number with the least detrimental impact, I think, to the city? And that's one kind of hat to wear. The other hat that I think that we cannot miss is the opportunity. So what is an opportunity? And make sure that's not detrimental either. And for me, that was where I felt like the expansion of the 40R Smart Growth District kind of cohesively or more organically is a direction that, in spite of MBTA communities, we probably would have done. And I know I've heard many talk about that expansion as an opportunity. And so for me, the NPRO, while I could see it's attractive, but I have the same concerns expressed by the planning director, there's a lot more to be kind of gauged in this specific area and that we have not really talked much about. And we talked also about the wetlands that we know is there. Similarly, though, we know on Parker Street too, we know there's an area of undevelopable land. So for me, ideally, I was hoping that we could see an opportunity for the 40R expansion, given the design kind of criteria, all the elements that we have already in our ordinances, and seeing what's palatable, given the industrial park and one of the criteria, and I can read them off since we don't have them, housing production is one. And I think that's a key one because I get counting Heinz Way. It's not going to be, we know this, it was recently done. We're not getting more housing there. It's set. It's very, very new. The housing, create new housing, maximize affordable housing production, which is check with the 40R expansion. The feasibility of development, which I don't have a clear understanding, but I would assume if you go further up Parker, knowing that there's wetlands, but doing it in a way that's kind of conscious of what I'm going to talk about, community character, which is also one of the things we talked about. The area transformation is important, which is where I tie in the kind of the gateway of the industrial park as being something to be conscious of. And then the non-housing goals, which is compliance with the city master plan, which we don't really talk too much about, but proximity to transit, and I include the rail trail in some ways, being a critical element too. Preserve industrial base and desirable uses, which I feel like the map of the whole industrial park is very compelling, you know, that this is a small percentage of the industrial park. And then the last one, likelihood of approval by the state. That's also important, which we haven't talked too much about. We have a 40R that's codified and that has been approved, that has been vetted and approved. And from my understanding in some of the sessions that were done, listening sessions on the MBTA communities, if you have something that has already gone through the test of time and through the council's process, that 40R codification is pretty robust. And to me, the expansion and extension, I personally would like to see us work in that element with the idea of some of the criteria we're talking about. So I just want to make sure I said that.
Thank you. Does anyone else?
I just want to say, in response to Councilor Macaulay's suggestion about doing two options, if we go that way, we really need to do that very quickly, because
Agreed.
we need to, so we would need to have an interim decision by the council before we start writing the zoning.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
we don't always
Yes.
have to be in the next couple of weeks that would happen.
Yes, and
Do
I,
you need to see like written out zoning or just kind of a.
yeah, that's where I was going with next, because I definitely agree with Andrew's question here. My concern, I think what we're doing there, and between what Rick had said and Andrew asked his question here, is we basically need to package a quick summary of that, which is coming out of the planning board discussion last night. Like I mentioned, the assumption was we're using the 30 unit per acre, 40-yard baseline, and we're only tweaking from there as necessary with MBTA. And then if you have any concerns beyond that, let us know, because otherwise the plan is to use the same essential zoning in that area in terms of design process, design guidelines, et cetera. We know, like Councilor Khan said, assuming the same sort of framework there, modifying is necessary for MBTA. And then unless somebody has a specific provision they want to modify, that's what we would be working with for economic feasibility analysis, for zoning, provisions and so forth. And that would be, that could be communicated via like a memo or a quick, summary of the scenario that would be run with these, two scenarios, like Councilor Macaulay said, this is the scenario on this one, this is scenario on this one. Here are a few pros and cons that we've discussed on this one versus this one. Now we have a discussion to have about that, but I definitely think, and this group was meant to be helpful in that whole process. It would be great to be able to verify with the larger council, and this is why it's great to have, the cycle of planning board meetings and planning and development committee of the whole, but ultimately speaking, to have the full council be able to chime in, so we know we have a relative consensus there about the preferred option that we land on if we're giving two. And I don't frankly care if it's one of those specific Parker Streets versus the others, but I do like that idea of being able to vet that with the larger council.
And it's really more important if we were to consider something on Low Street and Enpro, because it's a no-brainer to extend it.
Agreed. That one requires more discussion.
There's no, we don't have to do anything. We just draw the line differently.
Right.
So it's so that the need, so if we wanted to throw away the Enpro option, then we don't have to talk about anything, because you just redraw.
Right, but if we do want to include it, we might need to just verify that we have the same parameters, or if there's any major concern.
But
Yeah.
then we would need to have that. We wouldn't want to move ahead. If we were going to give two options to the council, we wouldn't want to move ahead doing a lot of work on Enpro until we had a feedback.
Completely agree.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, Councilor McCall.
No, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Madeline. Yeah. Madeline, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just did two quick comments. One is a question. So the existing Boston Way buildings, are they, I mean, I see on the map here 40 units per acre in that 40R district, but are they at that density?
I think they're about like 38, 39. They're just under that threshold, about thereabouts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just a comment about the Enpro Low Street. I mean, I do feel that area is ripe for development, but I'm imagining people having concerns about the intersection there with traffic light and everything. I mean, it's a tricky area, and I just imagine people having concerns about that. So I lean towards the Parker Street area as in agreement with what other folks have said, that I feel like, there will be more community acceptance, and it sort of expands the 40R district with more affordability. And and we already have, you know, zoning in place for that, so it makes a lot of sense to me.
Thank you, Madeline. Does anybody else want to chime in? Oh, sorry, Councilor McCauley?
Yeah, thank you. So, first of all, I want to say, I agree that we should make a recommendation and hash it out before we go any other way, right? Because I think that's important. And I do think the public seeing these plans, whether through the packet or through planning and development or whatnot, is important because the public always tells us what we can and can't do in pretty straight terms, right? If I had to pick one, right, for example, right, the option that you have that the planning board has recommended is the smart growth district, Heinz Way, and options D and J, right? And that's what they have done. If I had to pick one, if somebody asked me for that, I would take the smart growth, the Heinz Way that we had, and I would take option F, right? Because I've assumed the 930. That instead of your more conservative number.
Got it.
So if I take the 930 with Heinz Way, I'm at 1,000 units, 1,005 actually. So I only really need 282. So option F at 30 acres a unit puts me over. So there's nothing too dramatic. The councilor's point about, you know, the neighborhood and the characterization of the neighborhood, they'd be a little smaller than Boston Way would be. But that would be, if somebody asked me, that would be my opinion as another option to throw out to, you know, to the larger group to make a discussion.
Okay.
And therefore you've expanded your
Gotcha.
40R, and all the benefits that 40R bring to that area.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I could support that. Can you repeat that again? So you're saying the 304 from F?
The smart growth at
9:30.
9:30, Heinz Way, and option F.
But you're using the
30
30
units.
units an acre, which is the 304
He's making this
here.
based on assumption, not of eight
Not of
sixty-two.
862.
Right. So this, and in summary, that relies upon, so this is partly why MVPC and I are meeting with the state to go over with some of these nuances where the broad brush formulas don't take into account some local zoning stuff. So that'll help us to hone in on that number. And so here with that assumption that 930 is where we are, this is the other component you'd add, right?
And that way, you know, there was expressed concern on 52 Parker extending it to the corner. It takes it off. Yes, we have made an assumption that we're going to get an extra 60 units from the, you know, from the calculation. Right. And therefore it's really the jog without 52 Parker, and we've condensed it to areas that we potentially could have thrown in.
Gotcha.
And Parker Street jog, just to remember, is including 69, 75, 77, but just going a little bit, but excluding that 52. So kind of moving along.
Right, there are
Oh, right
two
there,
two
yeah.
more, yeah, right. So it's the same scenario from the planning board here, but with two more parcels.
Yeah.
Instead of the MPRO area.
And then there's nothing else anywhere else.
Then there's not, you know, and again, and this is just my view, but that doesn't bring all the other complications and potential losses of, you know, benefit or whatnot from that area, you know,
And-
by adding two more parcels.
Can we discuss that? That's just thrown out from this group here to see how
That
people
option, you mean?
feel
Yeah.
about that. So we could, because I do think
How
coming to the
likely is it that
council.
we would get to that 9:30 of the 40R?
Yeah, well, again,
We'll know better.
we'll know better after our discussion next week, because they'll be able to be specific about how they're going to treat certain provisions in our zoning when they run it through the.
Well, you could go to 40 units and.
Yeah.
And meet the gap.
And that's, I appreciate the question and the response, because one thing is that Ian and I are very adamant. We think it's very important for the city to leave a little bit of buffer there regardless, because even now when we get their feedback on how they're going to treat it, we still have their formal review of the formal application later on. So should there be any discrepancy, great to be able to know not only if we're aiming for something, but also we have a backup if there, how we want to tweak the backup if there's a gap there. So it'd be good for us to submit to the state with a little bit of extra, rather than right at the line and having some debate as they go through it, you know?
And I don't wanna, you know, kind of take shortcuts on this, but if you want to get council approval, you should do it before budget season starts.
Sure.
Right? Because
Sure.
other than that, you're not gonna get anyone's attention until the June deadline And that we would have done work, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden, everybody goes, I don't like it, right?
100%
April
agreed, yeah.
29th meeting, we could get something submitted.
I
because
agree, and
you
I-
met with Planning board, now us, and before that, I think you met with planning and development.
I
right?
did, I
That way?
agree, and actually, Councilor Shan has her hand raised, that's great, I actually wanted to defer to her because not only does she have comments and concerns of her own, but also, which would be great to hear, but also she can explain in terms of the committee, I did submit my memo with this updated information to the council for this next packet, so from there, in terms of committee dates, I presumably after that council meeting, receiving that communication and then having discussion in P&D committee of the whole, if all councilors show up would be great, we'll be able to get a larger discussion, so Councilor Shan?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So, excuse me. So thank you, Councilor McCauley, for giving us your input on that one. It's good to know where you're thinking. Andy, is it possible to put what we're looking at here, which is what the planning board was thinking as far as the Enpro site, and then the other option into the packet? Just say these are the two, and then we can have that discussion.
Yes.
My opinion is, I like what the planning board suggested last night. I like the idea of not going further into the business park down Parker Street. I like the idea of Enpro being an option for development, because I think that's along the rail trail. I think, like last night's planning board, they were thoughtful about looking at what it takes to develop going down Route 1. And that Enpro site is ripe for development. So I appreciated their thoughtfulness, and they're looking at this from a planning perspective. And I appreciate the comments you made, Andy, about it's not part of the current 40R and it would take some work, and we haven't discussed it before, but it's not the first time we've talked about Enpro needing to be something other than a dirt lot. So I would say that, but yeah, if we could get both of those items into a packet and we could have that conversation at P&D, I think that would be a good way to start, because I agree with Councilor McCauley. As soon as budget season kicks in, we're going to have a tough time even trying to get a P&D meeting scheduled, since Councilor Zed's got a lot of the budget hearings on Tuesday night. So we need to start jockeying for time there.
Much appreciated, Councilor Shan. A question to Rick, I guess, in terms of, since the planning board has its last meeting, we've developed this sketch plan, right, to show what the planning board recommended. Question being, given that the planning board had assumed it would review a formal report at its next meeting, and I think the goal here might be, would you be comfortable if I, even if it's just myself, or if you want to do it with a cover memo yourself, just submit it to the council for this next council packet, so it would have the benefit of this map as well, even in advance of, or unless you want to provide something in advance of the planning board's review of the narrative, a quick memo summarizing that this is what the planning board recommended, and
Sure.
I don't know if you prefer that to come from you.
I could do the planning board memo. I could
Okay.
also do a second map showing the Councilor McCauley's proposal.
Oh, gotcha.
It
Yeah,
would be a similar
similar layout
design
and
to this,
comparison.
so you could
Yes,
compare it more
sure,
easily.
that'd be great.
I'd
Yeah.
have to do like an edit to your memo,
Yeah.
right? Because you don't have to submit it to the packet quite yet, right? You got a couple days.
Oh, well, technically, I already it doesn't matter to me either way, frankly. I already gave the original, so I'm happy to just
So you're
sort
talking
of
about,
supplement.
which meeting? I thought you were talking about the 20.
It is this upcoming meeting. I had already submitted this,
Submitted next week.
this information here at,
Oh,
But you can
somebody said the
revise
29th.
it and get it in the packet
So
still.
there's not a meeting
because
on-
the
Oh, one-
deadline for the
there's
packet.
100%, yes.
But our deadline is next Tuesday night
Yeah,
to get things in the packet.
Oh.
Right. So if you submitted something to the packet, you
Got
can
it.
take it back.
yeah, that's.
Right.
the-
So if,
Back.
and I have no preference myself, if Councilor Shan's comfortable, I can just amend the
Sure.
memo I've submitted to clarify here and
Right,
add that.
that'd be good. Yeah,
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Rick, if you
I'm-
want with the
Work
two
with you on
maps,
that.
I'll just, yeah, okay.
I've got a
Yeah.
question.
Andy, I'm good with that. Thank you.
Okay, all right, we'll do.
I've got a question about the table, Andy.
Yes.
Because it jumps out at me that we only have a single number for the option F. There's no range that Ian
sorry.
gave us. So when Councilor McCauley talked about 304, it could be higher than 304 perhaps, because it's,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
Yeah.
302.
there's no range.
Yes, yes. Ian unfortunately is not available at the
Right.
moment, and so we're not able to have further dialogue with him until he gets back.
But we're assuming that
which is next
304
week,
is the
so.
low end?
That's
I'm sorry?
Are we assuming that 304 is the low end?
That would be consistent.
Correct,
Yeah.
Yeah.
correct.
So I could, when I do that second map, I could put in an estimate for the higher end, because all it is taking 52 Parker Street out of
Yes,
You know, so it's
I
very-
100%
very
agree. I 100% agree with
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And yes, unfortunately, only because Ian's away, we
Yeah.
can't confirm that,
Right.
yeah, clarification, but yes.
Yeah, so I could do a similar map to the one that I did for the planning board.
Sure.
Just so they're, you know.
Easier to compare them side by side.
Slides side by side.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, sounds good.
May I just, this is silly, but, maybe it's just me, but when you see a negative number, you feel like you're short.
Yeah, right.
And for you guys to tell us that's compliance is very
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah,
So-
and sorry, and that's part of the reason why, so what happened here was there were two different versions of this table. One was running with this negative number thing, which was sort of where I started. When we were having some back and forth of the format of it, it was adjusted, it was adjusted to make it be showing 0 in all these instances. But my concern with representing it that way was it was showing everybody we met the threshold, but wasn't clarifying how much further we might have gone or how many more units we created. So I felt it was more information being provided to show a negative because you understand how much further you've gone beyond the
There's
0.
definitely more information there.
That's why in my email and my memo to the council, I clarified that a negative number means you've exceeded the threshold. I just felt it was not providing enough information. Some councilors might say, oh, you've met the threshold, but we want to know how far, if we've created more units or not, and this would not show that if I showed 0.
Because that's
So
Yeah.
positive.
Or replace it with a
It's-
for the-
Exceeds.
we did it.
Exceeds.
Or you could,
Certainly.
or you could.
I could
do-
add green exceeds in
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
negative to me shows this is how much more we
Yeah.
need.
I mean,
Right? That's pretty
yeah.
universal.
yeah, we can do that, yeah.
Thing.
Well, oftentimes people in tables say surplus plus / deficit minus.
Sure,
And then you
yeah,
can switch those. You
Okay.
can make
Yes.
the minuses plus and the
Yeah.
pluses minus.
okay, yep.
I'm sorry, and I don't mean to be
Yeah.
nitpicky.
Yeah.
but
I read it the same way. I think it's great feedback, especially where this is going to be to a broader audience.
Yeah,
That's
public
not the
consumption.
explanation.
You want
Yeah.
to-
I had
Yep.
the privilege of looking at this the other night, so I got the decoder. So.
Yeah. Yeah, yep. Yeah. Yeah, I think quite frank, I will do that. I think the easiest way, in my view of it, just in the ones that are exceeding it, we'll just say exceed and then just put the number. Exceeded, and if it's a gap, we'll say the gap is, right? And so quickly know on those, it's either exceeding it and that's the number, or it's the gap and that's the number.
Or Andy, instead of, you can show the slide you're showing now, but then just quickly move to like swipe right and show the 2 options and that's it. Just don't let people look at the other things. It's like, hey, we looked at these 9, 10 options here, but then go to another slide that just says E and J or DH and J and just don't let people see the others.
Well, and again, I'll defer to you all. I mean, you're counselors, you can decide how you want to handle it. My only hesitation with that would be that I don't want to deprive other counselors of seeing the other options that have been discussed.
I'm saying
uh,
leave this slide,
Yeah,
but then add 2 more to say, hey, this is wwhere we got to. Like, here's where the
Or-
planning board is, and then here's where, others are as far as going into the business park.
agreed.
that's it.
Sorry, I was wondering, are you suggesting that we not include these variation maps? Just because those are the things that describe these letters. I wasn't sure whether you were suggesting that we not include these.
No, I guess you need to include the maps, but I'm just saying you at least focus on the 2 that we just described, saying these are the 2
Oh.
that the ZAG has gotten to.
That's what we're gonna do.
Agreed. I think what we'll do is, like Rick said, we'll do but we'll do, this is an 11x17 sheet here. And what we'll do is we'll create an 11x17. We'll do side-by-side comparison. Like Rick said, the exact same layout and comparison. So you'll see that area-wide perspective that we see on this map here, but in the other scenarios, see it exactly, color-coded and displayed the same way. So you'll
Okay.
see, one option displayed and the other option displayed side by side. Very easy to compare the two, like you said.
And with option, correct me if I'm wrong, with option F, we don't need Hines, correct?
You do.
We do,
We do?
we
Okay.
still need time.
Okay.
I think we just need to say, you take credit for what we've already got out there. I know we're not going to get anything new from it, but at least it's buffer for when we go to the state to make sure we've got some extra,
Yeah.
we've got extra.
That's a good way to characterize it. The
Okay.
buffer,
Okay,
the numbers are down. We don't want to miss that we have this.
okay. Okay, are there any other, is everybody good with those 2 options and scenarios and the way that we've talked about? Is there anything else that, Now, if there's a great time, if there's any other thoughts or suggestions beyond here, otherwise we're happy to, we can package that together, get it to the council and then pick up in P&D. We can pick up again at the next planning board meeting, circle back, where we are, depending on where we're at that point. Zoning advisory group is still scheduled to meet next week to check in. I'm perfectly comfortable keeping that meeting on, obviously, and making sure we're, we button things up as needed. But I think the most important thing is circling back through the council at this point, if we're communicating this out and the planning board is, giving feedback.
Question, I believe Ian's on vacation,
Yes.
and so he wouldn't be able to be back to update his information for next Thursday.
He's back on Monday.
He'll be back early next week, so we'll be able to, and we're actually talking with the state, I think, on Tuesday, so we'll be able to,
Oh, okay.
yeah, we'll be able to check in early next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, so our goal is to close that loop. I mean, once we've discussed with the state these other pieces, it'll be a lot easier for us to hone in on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can help to very much inform. If there's anything that skews that, we can let you know immediately that we're finding, so yeah, one way or the other.
Just the option F is with the 40 units per acre.
30.
Okay, that's what
Right, so in that one, in F, we've actually shifted up to this 304, which is the 30 units an acre. Yeah.
So there'd be less along the street characterization, right? And then again, we do have a buffer. If they say no, then
we can go up to that.
Which is something to consider. Would you rather go up to the 40 units per acre in there, or would you rather add
Another parcel,
52 Parker Street? This is
right?
Something to consider.
Yeah.
Is everybody comfortable with the going up to 40 units an acre on those lots, as opposed to, as Andrew said, which I think we appreciate you asking the question, is there, and this is back to Jennifer's comment about a contingency plan, it's always good for us to know where we would go from there, as opposed to waiting between committee meetings, which take weeks or months, right? So,
Can we see it again? Like
Yeah.
that map?
yeah, I'm sorry. So the Parker Street jog, let me just go back to this because it's easier to toggle between them. So the Parker Street jog, went further. The one that was just 3 parcels is this one, right?
I think the F.
So-
the
No,
one
no,
where-
F,
F,
you didn't do E, F.
Right.
That's the one.
Yeah,
That's what we're
so
talking about, and we can add, you can now go up to E,
But the Parker Street jog is as that in that corner.
or you could go up to 40 units per acre.
I think F seems to make the most sense, because if you see right along, gosh, what is that? No, Parker.
Parker,
Graph.
yeah, Parker and Graph, yeah.
You still have the industrial park aspects, and so I think that's what's appealing about it. I think going to 40, just my personal opinion, once we kind of get a little bit refined with the numbers and where we're gonna be probably a little tight. If we did 40 and look at where we currently have 40, I feel like I would be okay, not on all, but to see which ones, but would we have to group it all for all of them? Like, would that?
Yeah, well, the working assumption is here that in order to get to the threshold, all of these lots would go up to 40.
Got it.
Yeah. I'm okay with the 40 myself. I think it's a good question, which is, would people rather spread that over another lot or be comfortable with the same, sort of scale over those lots as that contingency, knowing that we don't have to have that another repeat discussion. We already have an idea of what we would want to do next if that was the case for any reason with the state in terms of the
But we won't know
calculation.
that till next week.
Correct.
And so,
I think
We don't
Chris has,
necessarily
But I
have to-
appreciate having the conversation now. Yeah.
Chris has his hand.
Oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. Councilor Khan, maybe I understood your question as like, could a couple of those lots go to 40 and or you know what I'm saying? Like if you needed a buffer, like a backup plan, did it have to be that whole grouping?
Oh,
Or could it
yeah,
just
sorry.
be one next to the next
Yeah,
to the
sorry.
parcel away?
Yeah, great question. Sorry, just to clarify, the working assumption on this table for those particular scenarios, yes. So I guess the sum result is depending on what E and I find and how they're going to treat a few of these parameters, and some of these lots have, it's more of an effect or another depending on whether they have wetlands on them. But at any rate, all that aside, depending on what we find, we can also come back to you and clarify it with a little greater precision. If we were to, to be at the lower end of the spectrum, if you included, like, let's say hypothetically, we'll run the numbers. If you could do the 3 lots here at 40 units an acre and then drop down 30 units an acre, we'll clarify that for you so that we understand where that line is drawn and if you could taper off further without going to 40 units an acre in order to meet that gap if we have it at that point. Does that make sense for everybody if we do that?
Yeah.
And if well, that way we'll know, and you'll also know if you want to toggle back to, somewhere between the 30 to 40 units an acre, as opposed to having to toggle up the entire way over every lot, you'll be able to see where you could taper down essentially, how much?
And given from Counselor McCauley and Counselor Shands, I understand the points. I think I'd rather do that than come up against.
Then go further.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
And that was a good point. Chief of Staff was asking, what's the appetite? Would we rather grab a parcel? And I think
Right.
I'm okay with the 40 as opposed to grabbing more parcels.
Okay.
For F.
Thank you. Does anybody else have thoughts on that? Anything that differs or? Okay, so most folks are generally speaking, at least as far as that question, same page.
I do have to ask one question. It's going to come up. So we're not grabbing 40 Parker because it's very well established. That's where the Mark Rich and the
Correct.
brewery.
Yep.
I just think we're going to be asked to explain that. So I just want to make sure I have talking points because what is is it because of when you look at the existing character or what's there? Explain to me so I know we could justify that.
I don't want to speak for others, but I think the assumption there is that there's a concern that we not lose an commercial industrial use there for the primary space in there. And the idea is that we're not going to touch that parcel with this in order to not encourage that, essentially. That's my understanding.
I guess my perspective is different. My perspective is that right now a couple of the uses in there, not all of them, but at least the brewery and potentially the rock climbing place activate the rail trail. If we could make a stronger connection to the rail trail, then we would have more of a community space. And I can see on the new development that's happening on the opposite side of the street, which is going to have, the opposite side of the rail trail, the third Minko property is going to have some community space there. So we could actually start building a little node there, and rather than replacing an existing kind of active, successful community space.
So in your assumption, you're assuming that if multifamily housing were developed on the 40 Parker Street lot, that it would assume also the displacement of the commercial uses as opposed to their retainage somewhere in the development scheme.
I can't see
you think they would
multifamily
bump the whole
happening
thing?
as part of the Mark Ritchie building.
Oh, no, no, I mean, if you take out the Mark Ritchie used, you don't think that someone would want to keep the other uses in any configuration. The assumption here is it all becomes housing. Is that? Got it.
I think
Okay.
that you'd be taking down the building.
Got it.
So the reason
Right.
is really related to parcels that are currently active versus more passive, because the ones we're grabbing now, what's their status and how is that different? And that's my maybe ignorance, and maybe the board.
Well, I can tell you that Hall 10 Leather is about to go under because they do all of their tanning in Haiti, and they are probably going to sell the building. So that is not an active one. I think the one next door to it is probably the
Stag empty autumn.
Yep.
This is.
Yeah. And that's the one that Cowie owns. That's just,
This 50, that's been empty for them.
Perfect. That's a really good reason. So that write-up is the parcels we selected are currently
Underutilized, right?
underutilized,
Yep.
maybe not around. The one that we're not including is active, and that helps. Thank you.
Right.
That's all I want to make sure. Thank you.
and I think the way that Director Port's been trying to explain all of these things, this is going to be another village. And if all you have is housing and nothing for them to do, I mean, that building there that Mark Rich has, that's where everyone goes to the brewery. This is the beauty of that spot on the rail trail. That is where everybody goes to hang out, along with the rock climbing. And honestly, if they put Haji's where Haley's was, I think that's going to be a happening spot down on Ward 3.
Thank you.
I think, Councilor Collins, right? I think the state will, for obvious reasons, the state, not that I think they're going to object at the end of the day. I think that it's obviously complying with the regs. They'll ask that question and then we'll have an explanation, clarification as to why. It's a logical question for anybody to ask as we think about the boundaries of a district. So.
Great.
Is there anything else that we didn't discuss today, short of what we discussed and sort of going forward from there, circling back, depending on where we are in the other discussions and certainly the council, and anybody want to add anything? Should we do it? Yeah.
Quick question, pivot off this a bit. The financial study that
Yes.
has been referred to,
Yes.
that would be, we'd pick an option, then do the financial study.
Correct. So there's a model, there's a template basically, but it's because it's dependent on our density allowance in particular. We would run it through that. And so we can try to run it simultaneously, but in effect, we're not really going to know until we've confirmed. So here, the assumption is we confirm what we want, we run it through the EFA, and then we're going to get back probably an answer somewhere between 10 and 15% is where Newburyport could essentially apply affordable housing, in that area. Or is it, because remember, the EFA is only required in a non-40R district area, essentially, at the end of the day. So here, we would be applying here the 30 units an acre. And then the other sort of parameters are in that model, and then spit out the other end is the state's interpretation of what they think is a reasonable threshold for affordability. And we would come back to you and say, here's what we could do by ordinance. So,
So if we chose, if I heard you correctly, if we chose just to expand the 40R district, we wouldn't have to do any FA.
correct. And that's one of the things that, so yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that again, one other, we didn't talk about that one, but it's one other scale item, that sort of debate too. And this is not to, diminish process. If we have to do extra process to get a better result, that's what we should do. It's just one of those question marks is sort of like, it's another thing that adds to this, another variable, so.
Okay.
That's a good one to emphasize, though, when we talk about this, the pros and cons or the ramifications, I think.
Right. I'm not as concerned about doing the EFA. I'm more concerned about whether or not we're able to bump up our affordable housing requirement as much as we can. And, and the EFA is an indicator of the fact that we're going to be somewhere between 10 and 15% probably based, at the end of the day. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for your time. We'll circle back, accordingly with the council and with this group and the planning board accordingly and see where we end up. I appreciate everybody's time.
Yeah,
Great,
thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.